Just to introduce ourselves, and I'm Stephen Luskin. I'm a academic teaching research in the field of international relations at the University of Manchester. Andy?
Andy Holloway, academic at the University of Birmingham.
Thanks. So, I'm just going to say next slide, please, Chris, with the style, if that's all right. Henry, sorry, sorry about this, but thanks everybody for coming. We're both really pleased to have been able to produce the report. First of all, just really like to thank Stripe and particularly Henry and Rob, also Tom Greenwood for his work on the design of the report. We're really grateful to have been given access to this massive quantity of data that's been uploaded to Stripe Map by trade unionists, labour movement activists more widely. The report wouldn't exist without that, and we hope to make some contribution to documenting what was a remarkable increase in industrial action in 22 and 23. But this isn't solely an exercise in just documenting what happened, though. So we hope the report inspires some debates and reflection on union action, strategy, and so forth in the months and years to come. It's the third annual report Stripe Map have published, as we've heard, and we hope we can return to this as a regular annual publication in the future. And we think there's value in that, given the very fragmented, very partial coverage of strikes that we tend to see in the media, and also the very dry and limited detail that's now published by the Office of National Statistics. Next slide, please. We're on it. Yeah, no, looking for that. Sorry, not here. Okay. So we've got to think about the purpose of collecting data on strikes and why it might be done. I mean, an article by a Victorian statistician, G.P. Bessel, in 1880, which was one of the first attempts we found to really measure trade disputes and strikes. He bemoaned how Victorian voice bemoaned how striking has become a disease, and a very grave disease in the body social, saying there was a need to examine and diagnose this great evil in all its bearings, and only by doing so we can arrive at any hope of alleviation. So the initial purpose of collecting this data, we can see, this is what familiar to some of your table, drawing from the ONS data going back to 1893, in terms of patterns of days not worked, working days lost, it's a bit of a loaded term, going back to 1893. The purpose of collecting this in the early days and continuing with it from there was to measure and I suppose therefore to manage the so-called labour problem, essentially. The main concern was with social unrest, its impact on the economy, the effect that might have on Britain's international competitiveness in the late 19th century in relation to rising powers like Germany and the US at the time. So it's obviously a fairly stark contrast with why Stripe Map are doing it. It's which is a far more kind of very valuable and almost kind of celebratory approach to documenting and raising confidence around strikes. We have the next slide, please. So just some background. The report focuses on data uploaded to Stripe Map through 2023, but clearly that what we understand as the strike wave, the strike began in the early summer of 2022. Talk about this a bit on page 6 and 7 of the report. So there was an upsurge of strikes there. The main catalyst, I suppose, was the spike in inflation, which peaked at 11% in that year, blaming various things, post-pandemic supply chain pressures, the invasion of Ukraine, Liz Truss, various other variables. All of these developments combining and having something of a galvanising effect for large proportions of the workforce. Strike rate begins in the public sector and key public services or former public services. And, one of our colleagues, Joe Rubery's noted those workers had, whereas at least 3 key grievances to the impact of the extended austerity measures introduced in 2010 on their living standards, the empty implied promises by the nationwide clap for frontline workers in the pandemic, and the excessive workloads caused both by the pandemic and by labour shortages in the post-pandemic period. 2018, the ONS data saw historically low levels of strike action, 67 disputes commencing, 81 disputes in progress, 39,000 workers involved, and a very big chunk of those were UCU members. We then get to the pandemic, the ONS ceases publication of strike data, then we didn't have the resources and all the statisticians were working on pandemic things, but some major disputes took place in that sort of period, including in higher education, as I've mentioned, major disputes at Rolls-Royce and Barnoldswick, and British Gas against fire and rehire practices. They've gone North West here in Greater Manchester, also against fire and rehire. at CHEP, which was a pallet factory in Trafford Park in Greater Manchester, who had a 21-week strike ending in April 22, which is the longest strike in United's history to date. The P&O Ferries fire and rehire case in 2022 was another very significant dispute in that period. From June 22, and this is where the spectre of Mick Lynch comes into it, we start to see the biggest rail strikes in about 30 years, which led to a lot of media coverage. The first dock workers strike in about 30 years also. Disputes in British Airways and the Civil Service, also Royal Mail. So by the end of 2022, there were over 2.5 million days not worked or working days lost, which was the most since 1989, with a total of 524 unique companies. And that increased further to 779 for 2023, according to the ONS data. So to talk more about strike map data.
So, as we know, the data generated by StrikeMap are essentially crowdsourced. And StrikeMap themselves describe this as being a working power mission. But essentially, workers and activists are able to quite literally put struggle on the map. Union members and activists complete a form on the StrikeMap website, identifying where the union action is taking place, so the employer, postcode, the reason for the strike, and its duration. I think, therefore, it's quite important to state that these data differ from the official record published by the Office of Business. It's in the sense that the workplace is the unit of analysis as opposed to employment. It's important to acknowledge that StrikeMap themselves said that they don't claim these data to be a complete account of all action across the country. Of course, there is absolutely no gold standard when it comes to strike statistics in the UK or anywhere. As all the data sets have issues, not least the official record against yes. The StrikeMap data are different to any other data set, but we really believe that they represent the welcome development in the landscape of strike data. So, as I said, the focus is on the workplace. On the one hand, focusing on the workplace more clearly depicts points of tension. But on the other hand, where there are several workplaces within a dispute is common to them. Counting workplaces will almost certainly lead to what some might perceive to be an overstatement, but only when compared to the official data. Which is another way. Well, so we need to keep that in mind. We received the StrikeMap data file in May 2024, which reported over 230,000 workplaces were strikes. Good. We identified a number of duplicate entries, and with the tremendous help of Alex James at the 10 Boroughs Research Committee, began what we call a fairly extensive period of data cleaning to ensure that we had a relatively internally consistent data set. More details for those of you who are that one inclined on page 16 of the reports. This left us with what we believe to be an accurate record of over 170,000 workplaces where we are confident that action was taken in 2023. This larger figure includes workplaces where multiple days of action were taken across the year. So when schools were on strike across England and Northern Ireland, if multiple days of action were taken, those workplaces are in their most times each day of the action taken. But we're also interested in the number of unique workplaces where actions occurred, and after sorting the data, we identified just over 34,000 different individual workplaces where trade union members worked on strike across the year. We've never really had data at the workplace level before, so I think it's helpful to know. What do these data tell us about the pattern of industrial action across 2023? We know from the data submitted that a total of 27 unions contributed to the map throughout the year. Full list is available on page 18. Action that was taken by a total of 8 education unions make up 85% of the entries to the map. That doesn't mean to say that there wasn't substantial entries by the other unions and the document strikes by ASLEF, DNA, GMB, RCN, RMT, PCS, and USIP, amongst the others. If we look at when the action was recorded was taking place, we can very clearly see that 75% and 4% of all entries were made in the first 6 months of the year, with a further 26% of the workplaces logging action in July. Indeed, July was the month where the most action peaked. The remainder of the year, yes, it only accounted for 0.63% of entries to the map, but we can't be sort of misguided by percentages. And we need to remember that's still well over 1,000 workers. So it might look like it drops off, but actually it doesn't mean that the action disappears. The dominance of the education unions on the map is in part a way of explaining the temporal distribution across year. And it also is reflected comparing the ONS data over the various last flight industry. Go to the next slide. If we consider the geographic breakdown of the work that's recorded on the map, it's clear that the majority of entries related to workplaces in England, so 75% of all entries. Northern Ireland provided the second most disputes logged on the map, followed by Wales and Scotland. These large differences in the geographic dispersion of the strikes, we think, reflect the impacts of devolution on state policy. The majority of action occurred in England is likely to be reflective of the government deciding to prolong disputes, in part possibly to add weight to the introduction of the strikes minimum service limits. And of course, relatively reflective of the long-standing sort of hostilities and unions. Final chart we want to show you from the data is about the reasons given for striking and the demands for workers. And the strike map data offer unparalleled insights into the demands of workers. The ONS has not published any data on the reasons given for striking since 2018. So to be able to use these strike map data to categorically detail why these strikes have been occurring is a very welcome development. Earlier in this year, we published an account of the most recent official data from 2000 to 2018 on reasons for disputes, and that found that pay was the dominant cause of disputes in that period. And of course, the strike map data unsurprisingly confirms this. Pensions accounted for 81%, almost 82% of the data, but various other disputes were logged about redundancies, victimisation of the trade union rent, fire and rehire, etc. We do need to acknowledge that 17.5% of people did not list a reason given for the strike when entering the strike to the map. So if you can please make sure that every box is filled out for film, that will help us know when. Now on to Steve to talk about the rest of this.
So along with the figures we've generated, we've used the strike map data, a particularly helpful identification of individual disputes within it, to develop what are non-exhaustive narratives taken from the data to really look at the nature of strike activity in 7 broad sectors. So these include transport, healthcare, education, civil service, local services, broadly defined, and also logistics and manufacturing. So with those, we kind of triangulate the strike map data with union, journalistic, social media, academic, other material where available to really try and bring out the breadth and the variety of workers that are on strike during the period. And the part of the purpose of this really is to highlight lesser known disputes, including those in the private sector. So to try and go beyond a sort of slightly narrower focus on the big high profile national disputes such as those in rail and health and education and so on. So we think this is valuable. We think we'll build on it in future. In future, we'd like to do more qualitative work on individual strikes as they develop over the course of the year for these more narrative-based sections of the report. And again, we think that's valuable. I mean, the media reporting on strikes is very fragmented. There's a lot of detail on ONS accounts and so on, as I've said. There may be kind of fewer strikes to actually cram into future reports because of the way trends are going. I mean, we also reverting perhaps not quite to the low points of 2018, but certainly not quite the highs in 22, 23. And for future reports, we'd like to do more interviews to bring in kind of more narrative accounts, really, what it's like to go on strike at particular times. 2022 and 23 were very particular years, and to paraphrase someone else, there are decades where nothing happens and there are years where decades happen. But we're confident there'll always be more than enough for us to write about. Strikes never really go away, so we'll definitely really hope to build on this in the future with those big disputes that have been taking place in 2024 and also beyond that. Next slide, please, Henry. So from sort of page 8, 9 or so of the report, we have these kind of industry or sector level overviews. So in education, spoken about, there's obviously a huge weight with disputes across schools in the UK, also in higher education. In transport, rail was obviously the most high-profile dispute, but there are a lot of other examples. So the bus riders, for example, the Unite dispute with Abellio in London, had a huge impact. It saw over 100,000 scheduled bus journeys not running, with a further 12,500 roughly journeys partially affected. So a significant impact, and ultimately ended with a quite significant pay rise for the workers involved. Smaller disputes, I mean, in Unite, with the strikes at Dundee Airport, a relatively localised dispute which shut the airport down there in April 2023. There was a week-long strike by Unite members within Northern Ireland's Department for Infrastructure, which led to the suspension of ferry services on the Sprangford Porter ferry route. It's these smaller disputes which aren't really covered in the focus on national disputes and middle-age and so forth. Healthcare, Emma will talk much more about this, but most of the key trade unions in the NHS and in healthcare took action, and there's an overview of this on pages 10 and 11. Likewise, on page 12, we've got something of an overview of the civil service. Just to talk about two other of these sectors we discussed, in terms of local services covering councils and the various privatised services that are operated under their auspices, there are quite a high number of strikes amongst waste and recycling workers, both the kind of directly employed workers, as with Wrexham Council, where there was a 7-week dispute that took place there. Also within firms like Serco and Veolia, various kind of privatised outsourced providers. Major strikes there, which in many cases were very drawn out, but also led to very significant pay rises in some cases as well. So these are interesting disputes to look at. Elsewhere in local services, there was a very long and bitter dispute in the September of 23 of mental health social workers in Barnet Council, taking 81 days of strike action. The council brought in a recruitment agency to bring replacement workers and so forth. So a very kind of bitter struggle, which kind of, again, goes somewhat below the radar as some of the disputes that we might be talking about elsewhere. Finally, in terms of logistics and manufacturing, we've got GMB members at Amazon in Coventry, which is a fairly high profile dispute. Also Bakers Union members at Allied Bakeries in Bootsall, taking strike action in August as well. So what we try to do here is just demonstrate the full breadth of the kinds of industries and employers and so forth where strikes were taking place really over the period in a more kind of narrative driven way, the drawing on strike on data. So that's all there in the report. Well, I'm not gone on too long already. I know, like, just to place it. It's a place I'm maybe my mother knew.
Okay, so we really hope to find the report interesting. We look forward to hearing your views and your thoughts on it. Just to offer some brief conclusions, I think it's undoubted that the strike data have captured a moment of significance. Stephen's pointed to some of the reasons behind this increased activity, but it's very clear to see that many workers took action, often for the first time, driven by seeing other groups of workers taking action and crucially winning their disputes. The extent of this action is particularly crucial, particularly significant in the context of the historic hostile legal environment operating. As an organisation, I think what we want to emphasise, StrikeMap played a really crucial role in driving solidarity across the movement by messages of support, financial donations, and support of picket lines. And we therefore need to understand that these StrikeMap data can be understood in this context. They've been created primarily as a method of creating this solidarity, but also helpfully serve a secondary purpose in providing foundations of the liquidity. So we want it's a great initiative, and we hope that people continue to use Strike. The data have been invaluable in enabling us to write this document and document what has been a significant moment. We've gone far beyond the overly narrow focus of the OMS. We've tried to go beyond these sort of classic industrial relations accounts of industrial action that rely solely on efficient data. And whilst these studies are valuable, trying to offer something more, go beyond substantive facts and figures, and to remind the movement that there are people behind the numbers. Thanks.